Clubs, specifically off-road clubs. Barry from Cross Training Enduro Skills and myself, Dallas, from Traction ERAG, recently got together and had a long format discussion about clubs, and we asked a lot of tough questions.
So Barry, I'll open her up with a question for you. Would you mind giving us a synopsis of what club life looks like in Australia?
I'd have to start with that really bad joke about club sandwiches, not baby seals. And I think a bit like the baby seals, clubs are almost non-existent in Australia. It's something that happened, I'd say 20, 30 years ago, but there just seems to be an incredible level of apathy in Australia where very few people actually put the work to keep clubs going. And so we barely have any. We've maybe got a handful of trials riding clubs. That's just about it.
Clubs are very important here, and they liaison with the governments to keep riding areas open. And I think, at least here in Canada, this phenomenon occurs because Canadians we're all hugging the US border, the southern border, mostly just for survival, get out of the cold. But, most of us live as far south as we can. And because of that, we have a lot of pressure, population pressure on areas where guys like to ride dirt bikes because we all live down in the southern region. And whenever you bring in people and riding areas, people like to hike and they like to mountain bike and they like to do all these things on the trails that a lot of these trails started as dirt bike trails. So I feel like the people that are just joining the trail network have a sense of ownership that they are not entitled to, and it creates a lot of conflict. Because of the psychological makeup of most dirt bikers, and I'll say most because I'm generalizing, we're independent, we're stubborn, we're adventurous, we're headstrong. So it's this group of people that all share characteristics that don't necessarily go along with working together as a team. And I find that dirt bikers generally, or at least in the past, haven't really organized themselves very well. But that is changing in Canada simply because the public is pressuring the trail systems. That pressure can and does lead to closures for motorized vehicles. So dirt bike enthusiasts that use combustion, they need to organize and band together to protect their riding areas. So here in Canada, it's being done out of necessity.
That's really interesting because we're certainly encountering the same issues in Australia now with riding areas. And suddenly these dirt riders are saying, oh shit, we need to do something. And of course, we're just so fucking apathetic. All people are doing generally is just saying, let's sign a petition because it's very easy to do. They get a reasonable response from that. But my gut feeling has been we missed the boat. We just didn't have that foundation of clubs existing for years, almost a bit like too little action, too late.
I have witnessed the same phenomenon here. Not everywhere, but I have witnessed that. And this is in the early days of clubs, because keep in mind, I've been involved with clubs and riding off-road for almost 20 years. And when I joined the sport or rejoined the sport as an adult, clubs existed already, and they were just starting to feel the pressure of the public. And I've seen all those same things, like they submit the petition and hope everyone's going to change it, but it's already too late. By the time a petition goes out and governments announce that this is closing, it's too late. Those decisions have been made, who knows, 6 months to a year earlier in some closed board meeting somewhere in some governmental department or organization.
It's a bit sad. I mean, I'm really glad that good work has happened in Canada. I don't know what it is about the national psyche that has allowed clubs to thrive in comparison to most other countries. Is it something about Canadians?
That's such a good question. I feel like this has less to do with Canadian culture than it has to do with suffering the consequences of riding areas being closed and then realizing that something needs to be done. Every jurisdiction that I've entered into has had a history of riding areas being shut down, and then clubs form and they get stronger and more organized and they're ready to fight the next time. The other thing that I find that clubs are doing proactively is that clubs have realized that if you don't have a seat at the table in those meetings where those things get decided, you might as well forget about it. Because what I've learned is that at these tables that encompass trails in general, they just umbrella the word trails. And if you think about the users or user groups for trails, we have horseback riding, ATVs, snowmobiling, hikers, bird watchers, 4x4 trucks, dirt bikers. There's a whole group, there's a whole bunch of groups that use trails, and they all believe that those trails are their God-given right. So if you have a group of these users, except you're not at the table, you can imagine how that conversation, because everyone's grabbing for a piece of it, but if you're not at the table, you can forget, you're not even going to get crumbs.
Yeah. Look, it's an interesting point you make about needing a seat at the table, because there was certainly a group of Australians who could see what was going to happen in the future. That was DSMRA, Dual Sport Motorbike Riders Association. And they actually said, we need some kind of pinnacle body in Australia to have a seat at the table in these discussions. The funny thing is, the organisation still exists, but all it does is organise rides. And I remember a few years ago even contacting them saying, look, I love your work, your ethos, your philosophy. What can we do to promote this? And somebody just emailed back and said, oh, well, that was back then. All we do is organise rides now. It's just that apathy, which I can't help feeling is a bit of an Australian trait. We love to whinge and complain, but do fuck all to actually fix any situation. Dirt riders are a bit of a breed. Less government, more personal freedom to do whatever the hell I want, and don't put expectations on me to do much about shit that could go wrong.
I don't know what it is about dirt bikes that attract that character type, but I would say globally, because you and I have had the privilege to talk to a lot of people globally that ride dirt bikes, and they're all similar. We're all cut from the same cloth, like ferocious independence and less government and more freedom. And of course, I'm painting with a broad brush, but there is a core group of off-road riders that think that way, and they do not want to be joining some sort of organization to deal with an intangible fear that may happen, maybe.
And possibly there's a bit of frontier culture as well, and that is that countries such as the USA, Canada, Australia traditionally have had huge amounts of land, not a lot of population. The frontier mentality of go out and explore and conquer and let's kill some Indigenous peoples in the process, but that's okay. But it leads to a certain mindset, because I certainly know when I talk with people from the United Kingdom, Western Europe, there's much less of that cowboy kind of mentality. They've grown up with very limited riding areas already, high population density, and there seems to be a bit more intelligence there about how you work through these processes instead of let's just get some 6-shooters and start shooting.
I completely agree with the frontier mentality. That's a great way to describe the archetype that is found inside of dirt bikes. Definitely frontier mentality. And you're right, all three countries we're talking about, Australia, Canada, and the US, all has a history of we are frontiersmen right from the very beginning. And the very beginning wasn't that long ago. Like, what is the value of a club? So you're asking someone to pay their hard-earned taxed money to support an organization that does something that is arguably intangible.
It's funny you say intangibles, because it was exactly the word that cropped up in my mind. You've got your tangibles, which are now, I think, being overtaken by social media. You just want to meet other guys who ride. You can do that on social media. You don't need a club anymore. You want to know where the trails are. You can do that on social media to an extent. Hey, has anybody got the GPS track? Or where does that track start? What rough area is it located in? There are things like that where I think social media, to some extent, has supplanted the club. But then I think you've got your intangibles, such as having a seat at the table of these people debating whether our riding areas should be shut down. You've got a public who've got a pretty negative image of who and what dirt riders are. Can obviously take a long-term strategy of trying to show, hey, we're not actually all redneck dickheads. Yeah, it's those kind of intangibles, I think, that a club is still very effective at doing. But whether people value that, that's a whole other story.
The only other intangible I would add to that would be the club sits at the table with the government and they liaison with the government
Mm,
and represent off-road riders who are not there.
yeah.
And that is a difficult concept to monetize or convey to the average dirt biker who does not want to fork up another $100 for a club membership. When you're completely correct, clubs used to have the advantage of it was the meeting place. I
Mm,
remember when I first got to a new area, I would join the local club and I would meet a whole bunch of like-minded people that rode dirt bikes, off-road motorcycles, and
yeah.
it's just instant networking. Just add yourself. That's now gone because social media and the digital world has eliminated that. And in fact, I would argue that social media probably does a better job than clubs for the meet and greet and the social aspect, just because they're so wide ranging.
Mm.
But as far as going forward, who is going to sit at that table with the government and negotiate for the rights of riders to ride these trails, to have motorized? So I think that's the number one value that clubs have. I don't know how to communicate that to off-road riders where they get it.
That has to be really difficult. At times, I'm a bit worried about how little faith I have in humanity, because I just think you take any major issue for humanity and talk with people about what they think is important and what isn't. And there are just so many people, of course, who just don't really place much value beyond just my family, my immediate friends, maybe a few people in my hobbies, and that's it. Whereas, of course, then you've got other people who are very concerned about international issues, the environment, warfare, inequality, poverty, human rights.
There's always going to be a third of people who will never join and never participate and always think of themselves. Then at the other end of the spectrum, there's going to be people who are joiners and they bleeding heart types that want to save the planet, maybe misdirected, but that's their attitude. And then there's people in the middle that just don't give a damn. They're busy with their everyday lives and they don't pay attention, nor do they care. No one seems to care until they hear through the grapevine, which is now the internet, that such and such riding area is now closed to motorized use.
Mm.
Then everyone hits the fan and they're outraged, and the petitions start and all the madness begins. And I don't want to be pessimistic because I understand it's very easy to be pessimistic about humanity and other human beings. But I can't help thinking that it's going to be very difficult to convince average off-road riders or the average person that rides off-road motorcycles to pay money to solve an intangible thing that is really, in some people's minds far-fetched, like, oh, they'll never close that riding area. I've been riding there for most of my adult life. And it's like,
Mm.
that's fine, but you don't understand what happens behind closed doors. Unless you have an intimate understanding of how government works, and how non-for-profit, not-for-profit organizations work, like a dirt bike club with a board of directors and executives, and the way decisions get made, you really don't understand how easily these riding areas can get shut down. Most people don't understand how democracy works, but until you've been in the trenches of how democracy actually gets executed, most people do not want to be involved in that process because it's incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly slow. It's consensus driven almost at every stage. And you have to be a certain type of person to be able to withstand that environment and have the patience and vision to follow through on such a long timeline. And once you see what governmental bureaucracy is like, oh man, it's very difficult for rebellious, go for it, freedom-based dirt bikers to be able to handle sitting at a table with 16 other people who do not agree with you.
I couldn't do it. It's like accountants. People like to make fun of accountants, such boring people. But I'm so glad we've got people like that who do the stuff that I think most of us dirt riders just go, God, no.
We did a video about club executives are superheroes. And the reason we did that video is because after being inside of these clubs with their democratic structure, and then they're facing a huge governmental bureaucratic structure to almost battle or at least work with, I realized that the people that are involved at the executive level of an off-road riding club, especially here in Canada, I'm sure the US has some as well, they are special people. Like, they have character traits that most of us do not have. And you're absolutely correct.
Oh, look, I think we have to take our hats off to certain people in our industry who are I guess you call them the quiet achievers. That's anybody who makes a club run. I've spoken with people in our very few clubs in Australia, the trials clubs, and invariably 10% of the people make it all happen. I've only been involved in one club myself, but I could see just a hardcore group of 7 people made it happen for almost 100 people, and incredible amounts of effort and work. And it's all unpaid. They're rarely thanked. If they're lucky, they just won't get complaints directly delivered to their face. But even then, sometimes they get that. The only time they will hear feedback is when somebody's unhappy with all the free work, volunteer work they've done. So yeah, my hat's off to them.
I've witnessed the same thing in all my time with clubs. It's been such a group of good, passionate, pure people who are running these clubs for the most part. I know someone's going to pop onto comments and say that they had a terrible experience, which we've all had terrible experiences. But for the most part, the people that are involved in running those clubs and giving their personal time are saintly. Most of them all have the best intentions, and they're doing this because they believe in it, and we need more of those people. The internet has changed the way communication and information is being shared. We know the history of why and how clubs were formed and why they're useful today. But with all these Facebook groups popping up, all these Instagram groups popping up, like the West Coast Riders, the East Coast Dual Sport group, these digital groups are surpassing clubs. They've evolved around meeting people, meetups, rides, communication, but they do not liaison with the government. Like, that piece of the digital world is left out. The clubs still do that, but what do you predict as the future? Like, what are some of the paths that could occur?
Well, if you mean Australia in particular, um, it would just be business as usual, sweet FA, sweet fuck all. I think too much is going to change. Every now and then, people will still attempt to have an online petition go, and a few people will sign it. Canada, I'm not really keeping my finger on the pulse, but I think it would be interesting to see whether the clubs engage more with online media, whether they can somehow use that more adventurously.
The clubs exist in a small way, and they're doing work in maintaining regional areas of trail or riding areas. So they are doing work on the ground, which is invisible to the average person riding it. You show up the staging area with your friends, you ride the trails, you reload your truck, you go get some alcohol and some food, and you forget about it. That's it. But a lot of these clubs are actually managing these areas, so there's that burden on the club. They're at the table with the government, but yet the large groups are the social media Facebook groups. Looking at it through the lens of a futurist, I don't know what's going to happen. The pessimistic side of me says digital groups are going to continue to grow, clubs are going to continue to shrink. My fear is that the people that run the clubs right now are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. They're doing it because they believe in off-road riding and keeping it available for the future. But those people will eventually burn out and get away from it. It's inevitable. And the question is the next generation going to pick up that torch of the traditional club and sit at these bureaucratic meetings? Like, that's the big fear I have, is like, who is going to do this work?
That sounds like a bit of a dark future. I can't imagine too many people wanting to step in and do that kind of drudge work. So it would get me there wondering whether some sort of digital process takes over instead, and not necessarily being at those meetings, but using online media, social media driven processes to apply pressure to the government.
It seems to be a bleak future. If anyone is listening to this and has comments or ideas of what you've seen work, or if you have ideas what may work, or things that are working in your local region area, please, by all means, add them to the comments, because people that care about the future of off-road riding, they need help. We touched on the character makeup of a typical off-road rider. Of course, there's ends of the spectrum, but rebellious, independent, they want freedom, they value freedom, they want to rip and let it loose on the trails, which is all great, because we also are those people. But if the riding areas get closed for lack of club interaction, a lot of people I know are not going to do it anyway. They're just going to ride. They don't care.
Look, it's certainly a response I've heard from a lot of Australians, where they'll just say, I don't give a shit. If they close that riding area, I'll just keep riding there. Yeah. And the more and more difficult they make it, I will just up the ante and continue to break whatever laws.
I heard there was a situation here in Western Canada where the public was being very difficult to get along with in an established trail network that had been around for decades, since the 70s. And of course, the city people move out in the country and they no longer want to hear any noise, or they want to have the trails to themselves. They're very, not, I'll say, typically educated, and they're good letter writers, and they understand how a bureaucratic system works. So they start writing letters and attending meetings, and they start to make these things happen. The Dirt Bike Club was doing their best to fight back, under-resourced, but the Dirt Bike Club peer group leaders have told me that if they lose this fight, ultimately they're just going to go rebel. and they're going to be wild and they're going to be crazy. And
Yeah.
from what I understand, is the government in British Columbia do not want to create that situation, because it's going to be uglier to manage than what's already happening. So it's in the best interest, or it seems to be in the best interest of the government, not to do that, because of the potential for dirt bike riders to run rampant and lawless. So that was an interesting tidbit that I heard this summer. We're flirting with electric motorcycles, off-road motorcycles. We're not there yet. We will be there at some point, whether we're alive to see it or not, who knows. But do you think electric vehicles will completely change the landscape of like the conflict that seems to be arising between combustion and other trail users, forest users?
Assuming that a really good electric dirt bike happens soon, it's certainly going to change the landscape a bit. I think for the general public, noise is a massive issue. We've just got so many dickheads with loud bikes that I think with time, an electric dirt bike future is going to change that aspect. I think it would just be seen as a little bit more green somehow in the public's eyes. I don't think we would be demonised quite as much by the public, because a lot of them would probably even have trouble telling the difference between an electric dirt bike and a mountain bike.
I agree with you that it's a timeline for electric for sure. And I think one of the pivotal decisions that are going to affect the future when it comes to electric is how governments decide to define an electric propulsed bicycle. Is it where does the bicycle end and the motorcycle begin? When does it become a motorized vehicle? Like, does it have to have pedals? If it doesn't have pedals, are they going to class it into a definition or a box that is easily going to be discouraged from using, say, hiking trails? I think it's going to be very interesting to watch. I don't know if we're going to be around to see the conclusion, but I do believe that that's the most significant change that's going to occur in trails and off-road trail use.
How do you think it would impact on clubs? Because if, for example, the people running clubs tend to be older, maybe a bit more traditional, are they going to try and encourage people with electric bikes on this spectrum towards mountain bikes to join the clubs? Or will they just go, no, we are purely about combustion driven?
I've already personally spoke to older gentlemen who've been involved in clubs for a long time. And of course, as we age, we get into ruts of thinking and we're less open than we were. But I've heard them poo-poo electric as not authentic, or they're not what we do. And they want to create a barrier for the electric guys rather than inviting them into the club.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's a smart decision, because I know people that are inside the electric industry and they've told me that we have no idea what's coming. Like, we will be shocked when we see what's coming. It's going to be a wave of electric powered vehicles and they're going to take over. I don't know if they're going to take over our style of riding, because we like to ride, longer distances, maybe that batteries will not accommodate at this point. But there will certainly have to be a discussion of where these new electric young men fit with these. And the funny thing too is mountain bikers don't want to accept the electric guys because they're not purists. And combustion engine guys don't want to accept the electric guys because they're not combustion. They see them as green. So it's like, maybe the electric is going to evolve as their own community and their own group, and they won't have ties or associations with either of the two groups, mountain biking and off-road riding, that are primarily responsible in managing single track in North America, at least.
Oh, look, it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. Guys, we're always keen to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments.
We would love to hear what you think of our ideas. And if you have unique, original ideas that we did not touch on, please add them in the comments, because you'll be surprised on how comments influence people's thought process.